Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Healing in Hindsight, your no BS source for thriving with diabetes. You already know me, Taylor Danielle, here for another guest episode, and I'm really excited for this one because I learned so much in this conversation with KYLIE, who is also known on Instagram at My Life with MODY. And if you don't know what MODY is, you're about to find out. MODY is another type of diabetes that a lot of people don't know exist. I surely didn't. And when I was on Instagram looking at other diabetes hashtags, I saw a post from her and I just knew that I had to learn more. I had to talk to her. And I'm so grateful that she was willing to lend her time to share her message today. So stay tuned. It's super informational. And make sure you go follow KYLIE on Instagram because she shares so many grateful insights on living with MODY, on what MODY is, and how you yourself can ensure that if you're already a diabetic or maybe you're just not sure, that when you get tested, you can make sure your diagnosis is correct. Let's do it. Well, hi, KYLIE. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing pretty well. I'm excited for this conversation because I feel like I'm about to learn so much and I won't give too much away. I mean, I know the title will probably explain a lot, but when I first came across your Instagram account, I was just like, what is this? Why don't I know about it? I need to learn more. And so I'm super stoked for us to get to sit down and chat. So thank you so much for lending me your time for a little bit to learn more about your diabetic journey.
Yeah, of course. Hopefully, you do learn something and I I don't let you down.
Not at all. I think you will definitely provide a lot of great information for a lot of people. But before we jump into that side of things, since I am the only person who possibly knows who you are, I would love if you could just introduce yourself and let us know where you're from and what your passions are.
Yeah. So my name is Kylie. I'm 27, almost 28 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina with my husband and our two cats and two dogs. I am a board certified music therapist. So I work with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities as well as older adults with Alzheimer's and dementia. So music therapy is definitely one of my passions. I have a form of diabetes called MODY, and I'm assuming we'll get more into that in a little bit.
Yeah, I'm super excited because I've talked to a couple of diabetic and non-diabetic friends, and they're like, what is that? So I'm super stoked to get into that. So, but before we do, because you definitely live the diabetic lifestyle, I love to ask my diabetic guests, what is one misconception that you would just love to just shut it down right now? Stop the madness. Here is the correct answer. Please stop saying these things. What's one thing that you would want the non diabetic world to get the record straight on?
For me, you'll see it, I say it all the time, just that there's more than two types of diabetes. I mean, it's so hard to get people to know that there's a difference between type 1 and type 2. So
Yeah.
imagine having a different type than that and being like, no, there's multiple types. There
Yeah.
are quite a few types of diabetes. So that's the biggest one for me.
Yeah, and I have to say I'm really glad that I'm learning so many more. I think the second or I guess technically third type that I came into contact with was the LADA or 1.5,
Mm.
which is becoming more and more common. And then you exposed me to MODY and type 3 and then there's type 3 A, B, C and I'm like, "Okay, we're just kind of going down a line here and I'm not even sure where it stops because it is and it's constantly being misdiagnosed as type 2 and I even took a step further and got with my medical team. I'm like, all right, I've talked to a lot of women especially who have been misdiagnosed as type 2 around my age. I'm 31 currently. I was diagnosed at 25 and I'm like, did y'all get this right?
Yeah.
Because you're not about to have me extra sick because you didn't get it right.
Yeah.
Which after a while I'm like, okay, I probably shouldn't say like you didn't get it right. Like it's such new information, it's so nuanced. We're trying to play catch up on understanding the different variations. So it's so interesting. But yeah, I'm on the same wave now of like there's more than two types.
Yeah.
And don't assume that if somebody says diabetic, they're instantly type 1. I think one that's come up for me is like when I do say I'm type 2, they're like, "Oh, so you just don't eat right." And it's just like,
Yeah, and
that
that's the other big misconception. The
yeah.
worst one is
Yeah.
that you somehow caused it yourself.
Like, all right, yeah, I totally when I go to bed every night, I was just like, "Please, please give me type 2." Not it
Said
at
no
all.
one ever.
Right, ever. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for that because I think it flows right into the question that's on my mind, and I'm sure everybody else's mind. What is MODY?
MODY is a genetic form of diabetes caused by a gene mutation. So
Mm,
it's inherited. So I inherited this gene mutation from my dad, who inherited it from his mom. So most types of diabetes have some genetic component. So maybe
sure.
you're inheriting a few different genes from your mom or dad that give you a greater risk for
Mhm.
diabetes. But with MODY, when you get this gene mutation, you will have diabetes. It is one gene, and that gene says you have diabetes. And so what the gene does is causes your pancreas to basically just not produce enough insulin in
Mhm.
most cases. And then in one case, in MODY 2, it just causes your body to have a higher base level for what
Hmm.
your blood sugar is. So whereas a normal person might run 70 to 120, they're
Mhm.
running 100 to 150, and that's just normal, and even medication won't lower that. So interesting.
So there's 2 types of MODY on top of that. Okay, we
No,
gotta rename.
so I yeah, that's another thing. There are up to 15 types of MODY.
Shit.
I specifically yeah, I specifically have MODY 3, which is the H1. I'm gonna mess that up. It's a specific gene, and so each type of MODY is caused by a different gene mutation. And
Wow.
each type of MODY can present differently and have different, like, comorbid things that go along with it.
Wow.
Your face right now.
Yeah, because 'cause I'm just like, "Okay, so 15 different types, all gene related, all can be" and it just goes to show that everybody's diabetic journey is so unique, just like your health in general is so I don't even know how to get to the next question right now because 'cause I'm just like, 15. Now that is my lucky number, so I'm like, "Well," but, um, it's just crazy because to think that so both of my parents were type 2, and I knew that it ran on my mom's side and her mom's side back in Asia. So I was like, okay, this is a thing to look out for. And then my dad was diagnosed also. Both of them were pretty late in age. And then my grandma on my dad's side, but I don't know if there's a full history there between my grandma and my grandpa, if that's a thing. And that's something that's always come up is like it's possibly a genetic thing for me.
Mhm.
And so that's why I was like, okay, I need to be mindful because it could creep up. And it did. I actually spent the year prior to my diagnosis trying to prevent it, but I went about it the wrong way. I was doing all the fad crash diets, and
Oh,
that's
yeah.
never sustainable. But even realizing, like, okay, if I want to have kids, I have to think about that. I have to really understand myself in and out, including my diagnosis, to know that when this comes up, if we decide that we want to do that, then I need to kind of have a head start on understanding that, because then there's a whole we're automatically high risk when we're pregnant.
Mhm.
It's not about are you going to have gastrational. I always mess up that word.
Gestational.
Gestational. Lord Jesus, they need to come up with better words. Pregnant diabetes. Can you just say that? Can you just say that? Because that these long words are just unnecessary. Anyways, but even that, and then to come out of it, and it's like, hey, you might pass this on to your child, and not make it seem like it's a bad thing. It's just
Yeah, so that's another thing with MODY as well, is that it's so genetic. You have a 50% chance of passing it on to each one of
Mhm.
your children. So kind of with type 1 and type 2, it's like, oh, there is a chance, but it's definitely not as high as with MODY.
Sure.
So that's something I'm, yeah, currently dealing with. And like you said, like there's so much preparation that goes into thinking about having kids when you have diabetes. And so for me, part of that has been my children
Mhm.
could very well have diabetes as well. And so, do I feel guilty about that? Do I just know that I'm extra prepared if that is the case, and kind of
Right.
dealing with all that goes into knowing that?
Yeah, yeah, that it makes it so fascinating because you're just like for us it's normal at this point and to some degree there's a part at least I know in my journey when I was still in denial the first 2 years I was just like I don't want this to be my normal, right? And I wouldn't want this to be for anybody else because it is such a crazy disease to have, but at the same time you see so many people who are like kicking ass, honestly. And it's like if I have to as type 2s, you see a lot of people in the type 2 space like, "Oh, reversing or remission or still trying to find the language." And I'm like, yeah, when I first started this platform, that was my goal. But, at this point, I just want to be healthy. And if that means
Exactly.
that I got to take medication for it, if that means that I have to do all these special things, fine. I just want to make sure my body is optimized as much as possible to where if I don't
Exactly.
need
If
all the
it
drugs, great.
Yeah, if it comes down to eating a carnivore diet for me to not have diabetes, like, that's not for me, I'll take the medicine, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. It's
And if you have
okay.
to do that the rest of your life, you didn't really reverse it, you just have found a way to manage it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
My endocrinologist said to me, now, it's not that he's a bad guy. I just feel like his language around it, and that's why I typically like to have female doctors because I don't feel like he was fully aware of the sensitivities of talking about like weight in general with a female client. But he's still a good guy. But he's just like if you just lose 40 pounds and we work you off of this medication, then you'll be good. And but the concern is if you gain the weight back, not only will your diabetes come back, but it'll come back worse. And it's just like okay, I don't know if
yeah.
I'm meant to be my high school weight. I'm definitely not living the same lifestyle as I was. I was a student athlete and I was a theater and I was active and you're jumping from class to class all the time and all of that. And then just you're still developing. Like
Mhm.
I'm a grown ass woman now, so it's a little bit different. And the older I get, my hormones are going to continue to change. So I don't know if telling me to lose and maintain a large amount of weight is the exact answer because that's leading me to a mindset that could turn obsessive. And so that's yeah, it's crazy. So I am curious to know, one, when were you diagnosed? Like first as a diabetic, because you were misdiagnosed, am I right?
So I have a memory of being misdiagnosed as type 2, but then my mom saw my story when I said that or something and was like, "No, you weren't." So
Ah,
my
okay,
mom
okay,
has since corrected me. I was diagnosed with diabetes, I think about 2007. I was
okay.
13 or 14, kind of on the cusp of 14. And I was diagnosed because my dad was checking his blood sugar on his meter
Hmm.
and he didn't like whatever it was telling him. And so he said, "Somebody else let me check your blood sugar. I want to make sure this meter's working correctly."
Hmm.
And my mom said, "No, I don't want to. Go bother Kylie." And so he comes over to me, pricks my finger, takes my blood sugar, and then says, "Oh, you have to go to the doctor."
Oh wow.
So, yeah, so my blood sugar was high. I don't know what it was, but
Hmm.
I do know that looking back, I had symptoms. It's just they hadn't been quite severe enough for anyone to notice yet. The
Yeah.
most that anyone had noticed was my mom said, "You're drinking a lot of water and you're taking like multiple water bottles to bed with you at night." And I was just like,
Hmm.
"I'm really thirsty." And I of course had been drinking tons of water, using the bathroom all the time, kind of those typical diabetes symptoms. So then went to the doctor, and I'm assuming they did antibody tests right away since I was 13 or 14 to
Hmm.
see if I had type 1, but I didn't. So I was just kind of given a general diabetes diagnosis, apparently. They were just
Mm.
kind of like, "You have diabetes, and we don't really know what type." So I was put on metformin and just sent home.
Mm.
But my blood sugar was still spiking a lot. I was still having higher A1Cs. It was kind of hard to control. So my nurse practitioner was just doing some research and realized that with my family history of diabetes, so the two generations of people with diabetes, and with the fact that my dad and my grandma were taking medication that has been found to be highly effective in people with MODY, she was like,
Hmm.
"Oh, ding, ding, ding. That sounds right."
Yeah.
So she sent me to a research hospital and they did the genetic testing and I came back as MODY 3.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. What is it about dads who are diabetic testing on their kids? Because my dad did the same thing, but this was before I was diagnosed. This was probably while I was still in high school. It was either while I was still in high school or like my second year or so living here in Austin. I just remember I was at home, and it was probably the only time I'd ever seen his meter and his lancet, because other than that I've never seen my parents test their blood sugar. I've seen their medication, and obviously now, especially with this platform, we talk about it all the time. And I felt cool because I was like, "Hey dad, look at my CGM. You should get one." So but he was, I can't remember what we were talking about, and then he goes and he grabs his meter, and so he's like, "Give me your finger." I'm like, I don't know about that. Anytime somebody says something like that,
Yeah.
you just automatic suspect, right? And he's like, "Ah, it'll be fine. Like, give me your finger." And my meter has, or my Lancet has it to where you can like turn down the severity
Yeah.
of the spring loadedness.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't do that. And then he didn't go to the side. He went
Has it
right
on 10
smack in
in
the
the
middle
middle,
finger, you know. And
like
I'm
what
like,
they do at the
"Ah,
doctor's office.
yeah." I'm like,
They
"That
always do
hurt.
that.
You lied. You said that wasn't gonna hurt. That hurt. I'm still bleeding." Like, I was so
I'm
upset.
I'm totally that friend that, like, will have all my friends, like, we'll all eat something sugary and, "All right, everybody, put out your fingers. I wanna see what your blood
Oh
sugar
yeah.
is."
Once you're
I'm
in
not
it, you're just like, let me see. Let's see. Because he was so upset after, I think it was like 97 at the time. He's like, so?
Yeah, I don't know why I even do it. We ate pizza and I was like to my husband, "Let me check your blood sugar." 104.
Yeah.
5 pieces of pizza.
Yeah, of
Rude.
course. Same with my partner. I think he had like passed out one time when he was here, so I like called EMS because he was pale. Like,
Mhm.
I'd never seen him that pale before, and so they came and they tested his blood sugar, and I was like, "Oh, if that's all I needed to do, I could have did that for you." And they looked at me, and I'm like, "Diabetic in the house, hello." And so they're like, "Ah, okay, you know what you're doing." I'm like, "Yeah." And so they tested him, and he was like 90 something. I'm like, just
Oh, that's
share your
fine.
blood sugar, okay? Share your metabolism, share your blood sugar. There's no fat on this man at all. And same thing, he can eat a whole box of pizza. And I'm just like, I just don't understand why. Just a little bit. We joke all the time, like, like, let me trade my abs with you. You put in the work and then swap back. That's all. That's all I really want. God bless our partners and their amazing bodies. Okay, so I want to actually kind of shift into, speaking of partners, kind of how your life has adjusted going through not only having diabetes at such a younger age and it not being directly like type 1. You already answered my question of like the other types, which, as we learned today, there are 15. And so, but how has knowing that you have MODY like changed your day to day from going through it as a teenager up till now to the relationship with your husband? Like, how has knowing that information really made it easier for you to manage your diagnosis well?
Yeah, so when I first was diagnosed with diabetes, since it wasn't type 1 and since we still make some of our own insulin, you're just not making enough. I was able to just take different type 2 medications. I was able to take sulfonylurea, which is the medication that seems to work really well for people with MODY. So in high school and in college, it was nice to not have to inject insulin. But as far as my relationship with like my husband goes with diabetes, he's kind of gone through some different phases of diabetes with me. We've been
Mm,
together for 10 years and my management has varied wildly through those 10 years. So
yeah.
when we first met, I was heading into college. And for the 4 years of college, I basically just pretended like I didn't have diabetes,
Mm,
which I was really able to do because with MODY, I was just had to take my pills. And
hmm.
then for me, that was my management. But that it wasn't good. I was eating whatever I wanted. I wasn't exercising. So always had high A1Cs. But he went through that with me and probably just thought diabetes is no big deal. And then after college, when I decided no, this is a thing. I actually need to take care of my health. He went on the low carb journey with me
Mm,
and we ate low carb for quite a few years. And when I actually started checking my blood sugar, he had to learn about what's a good blood sugar, what's a bad blood sugar, and that type of stuff. And now
hmm.
that I've transitioned onto insulin, it's kind of our third phase. And he's had to learn a lot more about what to do if an extreme low blood sugar happens,
Hmm.
or how I need to make sure I actually know exactly how many carbs are in things and what time food is going to be ready. So he's gone through those different phases and had to kind of relearn a lot of diabetes stuff. And then he also, I've had the talk of, our children might also have diabetes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so that's a big part.
So, what was the transition like from just oral medication to insulin? Because my dad had to be put on insulin, but it was kind of like, "Hey, your numbers are just so crazy right now. Like, we need to bring you down ASAP." And he does insulin and a like, Trulicity shot, and still
Mhm,
medication. And his insulin has gone down since doing the shot. And like myself, I'm on oral medication, and then I take an Ozempic shot once a week,
mhm,
which actually kind of cut down because I was doing a metformin combo, the Combiglize,
mhm,
extended release, and glipizide. And my
mhm.
endocrinologist like, glipizide's like old school. We need to get you off of that. So now
Which
I'm
is
taking.
the glipizide is what works for people with MODY. It's really old school,
Interesting.
and so with type 2, they're moving away from it, but people with
Yeah.
MODY just respond like, they take it and blood sugar, like, goes down. It's like people are usually super sensitive to it. So,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
that's
Yeah.
why knowing that you have MODY versus type 2 can be really important because with type 2, they're trying to move away from the
Hmm.
sulfonylureas like that. But if you have MODY, that's the first thing they try to put you on.
Wow, interesting. Because yeah, I was put on. So at first, I was put on metformin, and my doctor wanted to be mindful because I was sensitive to the stomach issues, and so I was like, "Oh, this is not. I don't need it to be bad Mexican night every time I take these drugs. Okay, I can't."
All the
Like,
time.
and so the glipizide was to help to
Mhm.
slow having to ramp up the metformin, and then I had switched doctors at that point. And she was like, let's take you off the glipizide. Let's up your metformin. Let's try an extended release, and if that doesn't work, then we'll add the glipizide back. And so it helped a little bit, but she did add it back. And then I finally decided to go see an endocrinologist just from,
Mhm.
talking with different people in the space. And I'm like, well, for type 2, a lot of times they just have your primary manage it. But I was like,
Mhm.
well, after learning about late onset type 1 and MODY and everything, I'm like, let me make sure I'm right. So that's
Yeah.
what really pushed me. And I was trying to get a CGM because the manual meter just wasn't doing it for me. I was still
Mhm.
having weird numbers and I
Mhm.
couldn't understand. And so I'm legitimately type 2. But yeah, he was like, ah, yeah, no, let's put you on Synjardy and Ozempic because they'll still get your numbers low or in range. They'll help you with weight loss, which I'm not a big fan of because it's been suppressing my appetite. And he's like, I
Yeah.
need you to eat at least 3 times a day. I'm like, you know how hard that is now because
Yeah.
you put me on these drugs? Like, I'm not hungry ever, which is cool, I guess, because I work through eating a lot, so it's not that I'm not used to that, but I would still feel
But
like
yeah,
like
if you
hungry.
you enjoy eating, so you would
Yeah.
like to want to eat.
Yeah, I like food. Food is great. I'm in Taco City, like, come on. And so I spent some time trying to figure out, like, understanding the differences of them and, how the Synjardy dumps everything in your urine and stuff like that. But that was one of the things that he said. He was like, "Yeah, the glipizide is so old school, like, we don't
Mhm.
need you on that."
I
But
took
it's
that
very
for
interesting.
14 years. I took glimepiride,
Wow.
which is similar to glipizide.
That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
See, so many
Yeah,
things in
but you were
school. See,
asking about my transition to insulin?
yes, yes. What brought that on? Was it something that you asked for, or was it something that your medical team was like, I think we should move on to that? And how did that make you feel? Because sometimes in our spaces, going on insulin feels like the end of the world
Yeah,
almost.
like, it's like the downfall, like, you failed
Yeah.
because you had to start taking insulin. So, I actually started taking insulin because I finally got an endocrinologist,
Mm.
so I had just had primary care taking care of my diabetes for forever. Never I saw an endocrinologist once or twice, but I finally got an endocrinologist because I wanted to start getting ready to have children, and so none of the type 2 medications except maybe metformin are approved for pregnancy, and metformin doesn't really do much for me. So, we decided to transition to insulin, but I've actually found that I like it much better than just being
Wow.
on oral medication. So when
Yeah.
I was on oral medication, I was having to work so hard
Mhm.
to have a good A1C. I was eating keto. I was trying to keep under like 30 carbs a day. I was scared of carbs. I would see
Yeah.
something that had 12 carbs in it and say, no, I can't eat that. And my A1C would then be good. It would be like 6.3, which is great. But I remember just thinking, my A1C is good, but I can't eat anything. Like, I
Yeah.
can't eat and have good diabetes. And I had never really expressed that to anyone until after I started insulin when I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can eat food and I can still have a great A1C and I don't have to be scared of things anymore. So that's kind of how my transition has gone, and that I feel very strongly that insulin definitely is not a failure. For me,
Yeah.
it has created a sense of freedom that I didn't have before. And yeah, I just don't feel like it's like a bad thing for me. It's been
Yeah.
awesome.
So, and are you doing just, manual injections, or have you tried out pumps or anything like that yet?
Yeah, no, I'm just on pens because to start, this was obviously just supposed to be like, okay, for you to get ready to have kids and then have babies. And then I think I assumed I would go back on pills after that, but I don't know that I want to do that anymore. So yeah, I take my long acting insulin at night and my short acting with meals, and I just have pens right now.
Wow. Okay, so I have to ask this because seeing so many people take insulin, there's all of these memes and stuff online about the math part. And I'm I'm vaguely aware of it, but I don't fully understand it because it's not my day to day. So how are you dosing yourself for the meals that you're having? I guess we
Yeah.
can use I saw you had a cupcake the other day
Yeah.
for your 1 year. So I'd love to understand how that works.
Yeah. So the cupcake was kind of a guess, but I guessed that the cupcake was 35 carbs. I think that's what I went with.
Mhm.
So I take 1 unit of insulin for every 7 carbs I eat. So that meant I had to, of course, divide 35 by 7 to figure out that I needed to take 5 units of insulin for the cupcake. So it's not quite as complicated as sometimes people make it sound. But when you're eating multiple foods, you have to add it all up and then you have to divide. And then if your blood sugar is high, you have to remember what your correction factor is. So, like 1 unit will bring me down 50 points. So, I will add 1 unit on if I'm 150 when I start eating. Yeah, so it's not
Wow.
horribly complicated, but it is a little
Sure.
more to think about than when you're just on medication. So you're probably aware of how many carbs are in most things because you
Mhm.
have diabetes. So you're
Mhm.
checking to make sure it's not something over the top. But once you are actually taking insulin, you have to then put math behind how much you're going to inject.
I kind of it's funny because math was not my favorite thing. My mom loves math, and to the point where she got me and my sister pajamas that says math is hard. Because we were just like, "No." And my mom actually went through that phase of, like, where it seemed like her doctors were threatening her with insulin, and so that sent her to this overdrive of and she actually came off a good, portion of her meds, but it's just like, "Yo, insulin can be super helpful. It doesn't have to be end all scary thing." But I
And
could
neither
see
does
how.
adding another medication. Like
Yeah.
if you're creeping up and then your doctor says, "Well, why don't we add a Trulicity shot?" Like
Mhm.
that's not a failure. That's just another tool that you are gaining to help keep yourself healthy.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that because in some spaces, or at least I know my endocrinologist, my dad is kind of going through that, trying to find that fine line between okay, being given this added medication is helpful versus okay, you're just kind of stacking based off of the symptoms that are going on. Because one thing that comes up for us is heart health, so
Mhm.
statin drugs for like cholesterol and things like that, and trying to protect your heart. But then sometimes certain statin drugs can make you gain weight, which is the opposite of what you want. So,
Mhm.
how has working with your medical team ensured that the medications that they're adjusting for you, whether that be, hey, we're just going to do insulin or let's do oral insulin, is actually progressing you versus kind of just stacking things to treat
Yeah.
symptoms?
And I've had trouble with, since just going to like a primary care doctor, I have
Hmm.
had trouble with them totally not knowing what MODY is. And so
Hmm.
when I went in and my A1C was like right at 7, and I was already on glimepiride and Januvia. So I was
Mm.
already on two different medications, and I had a intern, I think, working with me. She had taken over my care and
Hmm.
she really didn't know much about diabetes. So
Mm.
all she did, she came in and she said, "Well, you have diabetes and you're not on metformin. So we're just going to go ahead and put you on metformin." And there was no reasoning that, like, oh, it's your blood sugar must be going higher because you're experiencing this. It was just, oh, well, you're diabetic and you're not on metformin.
Right.
So, yeah, you really have to, yeah, figure out if, like, is this medication really helping me, or
Hmm.
is it just being thrown on there because the doctor doesn't really know what else to do with me?
Yeah. So did you do a lot of personal research, or did you get second opinions from other medical professionals when stuff like that would come up? Or
No, I wish that I was better about that and I'm better about advocating for myself, but I just really didn't know a lot. I wasn't super educated about what MODY was either, and I'm not super great at sticking up for myself, so I didn't question it. I was just like, "Okay, I'll add 2 more pills to my cocktail here." So, it wasn't really until now I'm going to an endocrinologist and I was kinda like, "Wow, this is probably what I should have been doing this whole time, someone
sure.
who actually has the research and the background to know a little more about what to do with my management."
Yeah, that's something that popped up in a clubhouse room that I was in, where she was a primary care physician. They were talking about diabetes tech in the medical space, and she was saying in her, I think she was in Arkansas, that endocrinologists were like booked out for months, and that a lot of
Mhm.
primary care physicians were having to take on learning and understanding about diabetes because it's changing so much, because no one can get a hold of an endocrinologist to really decipher the data on what's going
Mhm.
on. So I definitely feel like the medical world is having to push to stay up to date, and not just from a specialist standpoint, because if a primary care physician can treat diabetes in some form and prescribe medication for it, then they have to work to be up to date on all the different forms and other
Mhm.
types of medications that can help for that, because it's growing, and it's like a weird, like, it's growing, and you're like, oh man, I understand people, this can be hard for people, but at the same time we're such a great community and
Mhm.
a lot of us are thriving, so it's like, what do I cheer for? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, do I cheer that we have space for you, or do I'm like, ah, this sucks, not another
Yeah,
one,
and like, "Welcome, we're not really happy you're here, but, like,
we got
happy
your
to
back
help
if you need.
you." Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting and kind of crazy, which kind of leads me into your advocacy for Modi, because again, had it not been for what you've been doing on Instagram, I never would have known. So I would love to hear more about why you decided to just be so open and share your journey about your experience with Modi.
Yeah. Basically, so on my personal Instagram, I had just started following some different people with diabetes, looking up the hashtag diabetes, following people with different types, and
Mhm,
had a friend who actually started her own type 1 Instagram page. And
mhm,
so kind of after she did that and I kind of saw what she was doing, I started searching for people with MODY and trying to find hashtags about it and different accounts, and I just couldn't find a single account of a person with MODY that
mm,
that's what they were talking about. So it was smack dab in the middle of quarantine and I had lots and lots of free time. And so I just decided to go ahead and make an account about MODY because I couldn't find any anywhere. So I thought, might as well make my own. And it's become so much bigger than I ever thought it would be. I didn't think anybody would care. But suddenly, after my first educational post, there were tons of people who were so interested and so
mhm.
willing to learn and find out more. And it's been really exciting.
Yeah, no, I've seen. So I indirectly came across excuse me, your account, because I follow certain diabetic hashtags, because very similar to you, when I was diagnosed, type 1 community is strong. Like,
It's
they've been
huge.
strong for a minute, right? Because either you have it because you've had it from such a young age, or you're a caregiver for kids
Mhm.
or family members. But for type 2, especially because it's something that is not easily detectable, it's hard to know the community, because if you're not asking your doctor to regularly test you every year for it, you have no clue. And sometimes it might be too late. And so finding people who are type 2 that are my age was really hard. Now
Yeah.
it's a lot easier and it's cool. And I've let go of just looking for type 2. I'm like, okay, as diabetics, we all go
Yeah,
through very
we're all
similar
in this
stuff. So
together.
let me just find everybody. And it was, I can't remember which hashtag it was, but they had reposted your picture about a cinnamon doesn't cure diabetes. Who started that?
I don't
Like, who
know. And it's
started that?
so relevant in type 2 spaces. Like, it's posted about so much in like Facebook diabetes support groups. Somebody will be
Hmm.
like, I'm taking cinnamon every day and now my diabetes is reversed. And I'm like, no, don't tell people
Stop
that.
lying. Stop lying. Like, there's just no amount that you can take. Like, I put cinnamon on my tea and coffee drinks because I just genuinely like cinnamon.
Yeah.
Like, it has nothing to do. It's same thing with turmeric. I've seen that be like, hey, turmeric is a natural seasoning that can help adjust
Yeah,
blood sugar
and
now.
that's great. It's still not a cure, and it's still
Uh-uh.
not necessarily even a medication. Like, it's
Mhm.
not. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like you'd have to eat the whole root plant just for it to actually move the needle a bit. Like, I like golden milk because I just like it, and it's great for a face mask. But to make sure my blood sugar is in check, I don't know who started that, but that got my attention. And then when they reposted it, they included your caption, and that's when I saw your handle of My Life with Modi. I'm like, what is that? Let me see. Oh,
Yeah.
like there's
So,
just
I
so much.
actually I don't like the accounts that repost stuff like that because they
Mm,
actually it's mostly them stealing other people's stuff and reposting it without permission, but I
mm.
do like hearing that you found me.
They did
So
credit you, I
I'm
will
having
say.
mixed feelings about this account that reposted my, post. I'm positive without permission because that post went everywhere. I was, like,
Yeah.
constantly reporting or, like, messaging, like, "Hey, you didn't have my permission. Stop reposting my stuff."
Yeah, Instagram's weird like that because I have the repost app, and I didn't really think about it because it's the a lot of people are bothered by the credit, and so this one, it credits your account, make sure that, like, it's showing from that, but I'm just like, "Oh, yeah, maybe I should ask," because it's important that you feel comfortable with where it's going
And
to,
it
and some
really
of them.
depends on, like, if you had reposted something like that, I can see that you're a real person and that
Mhm.
you have diabetes and stuff. It's these accounts that say, like, "I have diabetes, follow for tips and tricks to reverse," and then it has a or, like, "To buy a t-shirt," and it has a
Yes.
weird sketchy link. Like, I'm not please do not repost my stuff to sell your sketchy
Yeah.
t-shirt on a link that might give someone a computer virus. Like, I
Yeah.
that's where I really draw the line, is when it seems like it's almost not a real person running the account, and when everything they post is just posts from other people in the diabetes online community.
Mhm.
I've started blocking all of those accounts so they
Yeah.
can't even steal my stuff.
It's crazy whenever you're trying to do the right thing and just provide your personal experience, and these bot accounts are just
Mhm.
especially now that I've started doing video, like, I get so many messages now from, like, "Let me get your YouTube views up," and I'm like, "You have
Yeah.
0
You're like,
followers."
"No." Yeah, you have 0 followers and a weird name that makes no sense.
Like, "What is this picture? Is that, like, is are you messaging me for is that a Voltron picture? Like, how does this help me?" Oh, it just out of the woodworks, or like, promoted on this, the same account that does it, and then I go to it and it's like, "Okay, it looks like you are promoting podcasts," but then I click the link and it's for something weird. I'm like, yeah." So,
Yeah,
if you guys are
there's a
listening
lot of
and
that out there.
you're seeing these crazy accounts that don't seem to have a real person behind it, it's usually those tips, those tips accounts or nutrition accounts
Mhm.
sometimes you gotta look out for 'cause, slimy. Anyways, so, do you have any plans to kind of expand on your life with Modi stuff? I know you seem very passionate about your musical therapy, and I think that's awesome. But now that you're kind of getting this traction of, like, people wanting to connect with you because finally someone with Modi is able to, oh, they look like me, they understand the things that I'm going through. Do you have any plans to expand that to any other forms of advocacy here?
Um, Currently not really. I have a TikTok where I've posted a few videos, but it's really just it's more my personal TikTok and it's just kind of for fun and I just watch other people's mindlessly scroll for hours. But no, right now I'm just kind of focusing on the Instagram. I think it's reaching a lot of people that way and
Mhm.
I've had a lot of people just like you who say, "Hey, I never heard about this. I learned about it because of you." I had someone message me yesterday and say,
Mm,
"Thank you. My son just got diagnosed with MODY because I found your account and then was able to ask for him to be tested."
that's
So,
awesome.
right now I'm pretty comfortable with kind of where I'm at. I guess the next step could be like a blog, but I don't know how much work I would actually put into that.
Sure.
But I can plug if anybody's interested in a Modi blog. My friend Jessie, who also now has a Modi diabetes Instagram account,
Awesome.
has her blog is called Modi and Me. So
Oh,
I can plug her account because she's doing the work too.
awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely put her information in the show notes because I think the more that we have us in the community sharing our individual stories, like it makes it so much easier to connect. And I love that someone was able to reach out to you and be like, "Oh my God, thank God," because that's how I felt when I came into the space. I'm like, finally, my peers, we can
Yeah.
talk about things because as we continue to grow, so many things change in our world, and it's nice to be able to just lean or just watch and be like, okay, I
Yeah.
can go have a drink, or I can have a cupcake, or I can travel, or I can do these things. And it's so great to see us being so dynamic and expansive in so many different spaces. And you never know who's watching and whose life you might change simply because they can relate to your story. So thank you so much for being willing to be vulnerable online and share your experiences. Because again, I had no idea, and I feel so much better because now I can adjust my language in, hey, are you a diabetic? What type, and not
Yeah.
assume that it's one or two because we're all, kind of conditioned to think that that's it, these
Mhm.
two. And it was easy to manage that way, and I think it's challenging us all from a medical side to non-medical side to grow and to understand that, like, we have to be willing to address the fact that this is very individual and we can't treat things like a one size fits all. I think a lot of stuff in the world is pointing to that. Like, we could be a community, but it doesn't mean that you are lost in the crowd
Yeah.
either. You still stand out. Well, that's really awesome. I'm excited to continue following your account and see all the cool things that you're up to, and to check out your friend's blog as well. So that leads me to my last kind of two questions. I would love to know, and I love to ask all of my diabetic guests this, what's one piece of advice that you would give somebody who is newly diagnosed with MODY, or maybe they've been misdiagnosed as type 2 and now they've found out their correct diagnosis with MODY? What's the piece of advice that you would give to them?
I would just say, and I need to take this advice as well, it's just that you have to be your own advocate,
Mm,
especially if you have a rare type of diabetes. You need to advocate that you are different than type 1, or that you are different than type 2, and that things might be different, that your treatment might need to be different. And it took me until learning so much about MODY because of my account. I've learned, I feel, just as much as you guys, that now
yeah.
I know all of this and I feel empowered to be able to advocate for myself. But yeah, you have to be your own advocate because nobody else is really going to stand up for you the way you are.
Yeah, yeah, you best. So make sure that whatever you're receiving is with your best interest in mind. Absolutely. I love that. I love that. So how can people connect with you if they want to see if you decide to do a Modi blog, or maybe if you throw the music into it and make like a diabetic group playlist or something like that? How can they keep up with you and all the cool things you're doing?
Right now, it's just my Instagram at My Life with Modi.
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
will ensure that that is in the show notes. And thank you for all of the resources as well. You guys, she left me with a bunch of great information. So I will make sure everybody has access to that. Again, Kylie, I am so grateful. You definitely taught me a lot. Okay. So
Good.
at the top you were nervous. Trust me, I learned a lot. I've got some more research to do
Good, good.
alongside these articles you sent me. Well, you guys, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Remember, every Tuesday and Thursday, you can check out the show at Healing in Hindsight on Instagram if you want to know what I'm up to or who my next guest is. Thank you. Y'all, my brain is still wrapping. I'm still trying to understand 15 different types of MODY by itself. Okay, just MODY diabetes. There's still a type 3 that's got to, there's so many types, you guys. And wow, Kylie, thank you. Thank you again so much for just being willing to share your story and your vulnerability and all the things that you've gone through, and being a huge advocate for people so that they can understand what's going on. To have a family reach out and say, hey, I was able to tell my son's medical team to retest to make sure that he's got the right diagnosis and everything. That is truly awesome. So, seriously, go follow Kylie at My Life with Modi on Instagram, and I will ensure to link everything that she shared in the show notes, including her friend who also has a blog all about Modi, Modi and me. That's so cute. I love it, like Marley and me. Okay. Anyways, make sure that you just keep up, guys. I mean, as technology evolves, as our diagnosis changed, like there's so much information out there that we can learn. There's so much that we can do to ensure that we're making sure people are aware that there's more than just two types. And hey, if you're a type 2 diabetic like myself and you were diagnosed at a fairly early age or around that early 20s type of thing, talk to your medical team. I went and talked to mine and ensure that you've been diagnosed correctly, especially if you have a family history of it, because it could make or break your experience as a diabetic. And we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to optimize our bodies to make sure that this disease does not control us. So, Kylie, thank you again. Thank you all for listening and for your time and energy, and I'll catch you guys next week.